Happy birthday, FusionFall. Today, January 13th, 2025, marks the 16th anniversary of FusionFall, Cartoon Network's first and last MMORPG. I thought about releasing this video on New Year's Day, but feel that celebrating FusionFall's full release would be much more fitting than referencing Jet Black New Year. I have probably watched every FusionFall video essay on YouTube, and even though I enjoyed every single one, most videos, even the more popular ones, didn't really talk about FusionFall the video game. They focused on the circumstances of FusionFall's closure, the drama related to Cartoon Network's cease and desist to FusionFall Retro, and how horrifying Eddie looks. Which I get. Considering the game is pretty old, most of the creators who talked about FusionFall either straight up didn't play it, got bored, or couldn't play it because there were no servers up and FusionFall was not yet open source. There are some really great love letters to FusionFall out there by relatively small creators that I think anyone who enjoys the game should check out, and I will be linking them in the description of this video. Mind you, there's a chance that I've missed a few. With that being said, I'm here to talk about FusionFall, the MMORPG, meaning its gameplay, mechanics, history, and most importantly, its world. The time is now, the hero is you, let's just get into it. FusionFall begins with Dexter and the, shapely Computress checking in on you, the volunteer time traveler being sent to the future. This opening section of the game is fully voice acted, by the way.
It is I, Dexter. Can you hear me in there? Thank you for volunteering for this important time travel experiment.
Apparently Dexter just picked somebody out of the crowd because he, like Professor Oak before him, does not know your name or gender. Character creation begins, and it's pretty good for a 2009 kids game. Originally, when creating a character, you could randomly generate a name, use words from the list the generator pulls from, or type your own. I vividly remember the game giving me the name Wax Thomas, even though I was 10 and could easily have typed those in myself without remembering. I cannot find wax in the word list at all, so maybe I just made it up. Notably, a few items are missing, like a white version of these pants that I promise was in the original game, so maybe some words got lost too. Anyways, that's where my name came from. FusionFall. Also, in 2009, online gaming was still pretty new and untapped, but common knowledge was that sharing anything about yourself online was not safe, especially for children, and me being afraid of being e-stalked or something decided to make my character white instead of black. I was like 10 or something, so I had genuine fear that someone would find me from the color of my character's skin. This is a weird regret that followed me throughout my entire life, and because of that, from now on, Wax will have brown skin. He officially has the pass. To address the Academy-sized elephant in the room, there are two versions of FusionFall available, being Original and Academy. Original is just the game in its launch state, with the classic opening and future segments that I will be playing through. Academy is FusionFall after Grigon Entertainment, the dev studio behind the game, went bankrupt, and the Cartoon Network team stepped in to manage what was left of the extremely underdeveloped FusionFall. The Cartoon Network team seemed passionate about updating and upkeeping FusionFall at first, and changed the entire opening sequence of the game, along with adding many characters, nanos, and missions. I do not like that version. Not only is Academy just not what I played for those 2 developmental years of my life, but it also is unstable and crashes a lot in its untampered state. I will be addressing the differences between Classic FusionFall and Academy FusionFall as they pop up. Oh, and even though I said there were only like 2 versions of the game, technically there is more like 2.5. Some servers have FusionFall Original in its most basic launch state with less missions and characters in their original positions, and then there's the widely accepted enhanced version that includes content from all the updates before Academy, and usually a lot of quality of life changes made by teams of fans working to keep FusionFall alive. I will be playing on the Retribution server, not to be confused with Retro, as it made playing through this game twice a lot more reasonable of an idea. This means you'll be seeing the original FusionFall updated with its regular patch history, including some conveniences like vehicle vendors being in most hub areas. No matter what server you're playing on, ultimately FusionFall is just FusionFall, so unless you want a more active server, it doesn't matter where you choose to experience the game. After character creation, Dexter readies his time machine and sending you further into the future than intended, where you'll see Dex Labs exploding and Cartoon Network characters fighting fusion spawns. You're greeted by number 5 and Bin, followed by the most stiff movement tutorial of all time. The game won't register any inputs but the ones shown on screen. All the while, the very enticing computer speaks to you like a pet, doing every trick right on the first try.
Excellent. Use the WAS good. To move backwards, press and hold very good.
A lot of people say this tutorial is too restrictive in its treating you like a child with no hands, but thinking about it for a second, FusionFall released in 2009 when most children either had no interest in computer games or were just never introduced to them. This was a time in which most kids didn't have unfettered access to tech like smartphones and decent PCs, or even gaming consoles. Back in early 2000s, gaming wasn't as normalized as it is today. Many parents saw video games like candy. It's not good for you, but maybe if you are good, you can have some after school. Understanding this is key to understanding that FusionFall was not only a lot of kids' first PC game, let alone MMO, but also their first video game, so having a stern tutorial that gets the point across was definitely a good idea. Anyway, a bunch of fusion spawns appear from a Terrafuser, and number 5 hands you an unregistered firearm. You are then shown how to fight fusion monsters with the basic single-target rifle. They don't fight back, but the next one will, provided you're in range. Something a lot of players notice immediately is Bin not transforming while fighting in this tutorial section, which has a narrative explanation later on. I could explain the primary conflict of the game, but number 5 and Bin do a pretty good job, so...
You're in a world of trouble now. Look up in the sky. That's Planet Fusion, ruled by some nasty guy named Fuse. Fuse has covered the world with gross green goo, and those disgusting fusion spawns are wrecking everything.
Fuse's monsters have evolved and adapted to our planet. You should see some of them. They use things called Terrafusers to infect everything with goo. If the infection gets bad enough, Planet Fusion will absorb our world.
You are then prompted to help number 2, and this leads into one of the most subtle yet brilliant conditioning moments in a children's game ever. Your attention will be shifted to the minimap, something you'll get used to rather quickly unless you're a League of Legends player. After accepting number 2's mission, you'll be tasked with defeating an oil ogre. In an attempt to get you used to your minimap, you'll notice the shortest path to the ogre isn't exactly down the street, but more so veering towards this fallen tech panel. This is where the game first acclimates players to its physics, noting that you can walk up rather steep surfaces without any drawbacks like slowing or slipping down. This is actually the most important part of this tutorial, because FusionFall is quite vertical and more platforming oriented than action oriented. A child will likely internalize the fact that they can walk up surfaces like this without having to know why it works, only that it does. The Oil Ogre is the first example of a ranged enemy you'll see and easily defeat. God, I want to play FusionFall. Most children and adults with a flicker of joy still remaining in their hearts will end up messing around these elevated platforms a while before completing number 2's mission. After which, you'll get your first Nano mission and be introduced to infected zones by Buttercup. I find it quite amusing that this tutorial is fully voice acted, so I'll let Buttercup and Dexter explain some key points about the game.
The most infected areas on the planet are called infected zones. Thanks to Fuse's Terrafuser machines, fusion matter is totally out of control inside. Ha! Good thing Dexter set up energy shields to contain the infection.
You're given your first platforming section to traverse and a fusion portal to enter. While this is your first time entering a fusion layer, the only enemy inside is Fusion Buttercup.
It is you! I knew we would meet again. My stupid sister messed up the time jump sequence and destroyed the time capsule. We need to get you back to the past so you can save our world. Fusion Buttercup is in the next room. We must stop her before she can cause any more damage. Fusions are dark, twisted versions of this planet's heroes, created by Fuse himself. They are extremely dangerous, but I think you can handle it. Are you ready? Let's go!
During this fight, you'll probably notice how stiff the combat is, which does actually change rather quickly, but takes a good while to get challenging. As silly as it may sound, FusionFall is not a tab target MMO, but an action MMO. I will talk about the weapons and combat later on after unlocking everything. After beating Fusion Buttercup, you'll get your first Nano. Nanos are basically your skills in this game, taking the shape of chibi versions of Cartoon Network characters. Buttercup being the first you collect is funny, because she also is the most important Nano for anyone wanting to reach the level cap in a reasonable amount of time. This part of the tutorial will show you how to use your nano powers by having Buttercup stun the Tech Wing to escape Tech Square, simultaneously showing that Earth is losing this war in the future.
You did great, but it looks like Buttercup and the rest weren't able to handle those other Terrafusers in time. Dexter says we gotta find Mandark so we can rebuild the time machine and send you back to the past. Let's get out of here!
Despite our best efforts, Tech Square has been lost. But this war is not over yet. Not by a long shot. Our time-traveling friend here is just the hero we need. Between Mandark and number 2, I am sure you will be able to rebuild my time capsule. Don't worry about me. I will be fine. Get back to Sector V and to safety. Dexter, out!
Alright everyone, next stop, Hero Square, Sector V!
Upon reaching Sector V, and by extension the open world sandbox, you'll be greeted by Computress with your first mission, and I gotta get this shit out of my system right now. Why the fuck did Dexter build her so bad? Why did this nigga even give her curves? Dexter must have made her during that growth spurt. But the crazy thing is, Computress is into Utonium. Why can she do that? Why does she have to get you acclimated to questing and fighting? You'll basically be doing cleanup for number 2 for a while, and let me tell you, this first mission he gives is going to exemplify the worst that FusionFall has to offer. Specifically the RNG monster drop missions where you have to beat an enemy and hope the RNG counts that kill as one of whatever number, usually anywhere from 1 to 3, sometimes more. The Shock Tanglers are actually pretty tough too. Even with Buttercup's stun, they do enough damage to make you have to wait in between every 3 encounters to heal up.
It is possible to form a group of up to 4 players.
See what I mean? He didn't wait. He just died because he was impatient. When the servers were new and the starting areas were full of players, you'd have to be the first person to attack an enemy to get its quest rewards or drops. Some servers changed this to anyone who deals damage gets a reward. Even though FusionFall isn't as active as it was before, it's certainly not dead. That clip of that guy dying was from Open Fusion before I settled on Retribution. Importantly, you'll notice that there are no healing items in this game, which will become annoying very quickly. This means you'll be waiting outside of combat quite often until level 3, where you unlock Eddie, your first healing nano. Speaking of which, your second nano will be number 2. Now is a good time to talk about the leveling system in FusionFall. In Original, when that green bar around your minimap fills up, being your fusion matter and more accurately readable in your inventory, you'll receive a nano mission, which is mandatory in order to reach the next level. In Academy, you don't actually need to complete most of these nano missions to move on. You'll just get your next level and be made aware that a nano mission is available. There are a few other things that passively occur whenever you level up, which the game makes no effort to tell you about. 1, your base health goes up a bit. 2, the amount of fusion matter required to get to the next level increases, and most oddly, the amount of fusion matter required to change a nano's ability increases, meaning the later that you wait to change a nano's ability, the longer it will take you to level up. This isn't really important if you're already familiar with the nanos and know what kind of build you want going in, but if you're new, this could really stop you from completing the game, which I will go into great detail about later. But outside of that, every time you level up, new world missions will unlock from Cartoon Network characters and other NPCs. Your first real nano mission will have you enter your first real infected zone, the KND training area. This exists to get players used to the concept of platforming, so there aren't any real consequences for failing a jump besides trying again. Fusion number 2 has a chance to use an eruption attack. I don't have footage of this anymore probably, but this nano has the incredibly important run ability, which increases your movement speed. Note that I said movement instead of walking speed. After exiting the infected zone, you'll be led to Number 5 and Buttercup, who have many quests for you. This is important because it gets the player used to accepting multiple quests with similar or nearby goals to turn in simultaneously. This also includes the first quest that specifically has you climb an open world building, acclimating you to the game's platforming. FusionFall's world is the real reason you would want to play the game, which is mostly uninstanced, meaning it's an open world. This is abnormal even for MMOs today. FusionFall was meant to be kid-friendly for gamers of all skill levels to jump in and just play. To accomplish that, it was decided that the game would be more platformer-focused than action-focused. To that end, an open-world theme park was created that I absolutely cannot wait to show you. But for now, we are in the future, which is grimy and green and kind of darker toned. The future was the game's free trial, offering less than a third of the full map and only 4 nanos to collect. The future was also used to show a timeline where things went wrong and Earth is on the losing end of the war, drowning the sky in green and having the available areas more or less destroyed. The future also leads to a massive disconnect in the community, being people whose parents paid the $6 sub fee and those who did not. Every time I played the game and I showed my friends on Discord, they would say something like, "I remember that game. I played it until I found out you had to pay, and my parents wouldn't pay for it." This is where most kids' interaction with the game ended, at least until it became free to play after the Academy update. In that version, the future doesn't exist. Instead, your training area is a zoo, where the new player experience is much quicker, but far less immersive in my opinion. This was likely done because without a paywall, there was no longer a reason to offer an extended trial. In case you're wondering, I was one of the lucky kids who did get a parent to pay for the sub fee. As we progress, level 3 is where you'll unlock your first healing nano, Eddie. I say that, but realistically each nano has 3 options to choose from, but most of them have only one correct choice because if you choose anything but run on number 2 and heal on Eddie, you might as well restart the game. Around this time, you might stumble upon your first world boss. They don't do a whole lot more damage than normal monsters, but they do have a lot more health, so you won't be able to beat them in a battle of attrition until level 4, where you will be able to one-shot them with the Nano Eduardo's Drain ability. This deals max health damage over time. Drain is just really good for bossing. There aren't that many bosses, but especially with the fan-made additions to the game, you'll probably want to take a Drain Nano into those too. If you're planning on 100%ing the game without any glitches or commands, you'll need to complete every future mission before returning to the past. This is made easier because of a little trick once you hit level 4. You can just teleport between Peach Creek Commons and Sector V for free. This is important because there isn't a reasonable method of getting to that specific infected zone, even in the past, because of how far away it is from any hub areas. Seriously, the cul-de-sac is like just really far from it for some reason. Before moving on to the past, there's something we need to address. There is no way to complete the game in a reasonable amount of time without abusing a very specific oversight of the game. I say it is an oversight, but for all we know, it could have been intentional. There are 2 mission types that give you fusion matter, or experience, being world missions and guide missions. World missions are just normal quests unlocked by leveling up. Each new level will reveal a new host of missions. Guide missions are a bit different. Upon reaching the past, you'll be asked to choose between Dexter, Ben Tennyson, Mojo Jojo, and Double D as your guides. The guides each offer you 1 mission per level that gives more money and fusion matter than world missions, but only once per level. This isn't so bad, as when playing through the game, the quests usually line up with the world quest, which leads you to new areas befitting your level. Guide missions will also give you gear stronger than anything at your level and usually many levels higher, which you can only use while that guide is active, so you can only cosplay as a monkey minion while working for Mojo Jojo. Where this gets annoying is switching guides around. You can do this at any time, but it becomes a real hassle because the game is so abundant with missions and fusion matter early on, you won't see a reason to switch guides on a first playthrough till around level 23. This is unfun. because you'll be stuck catching up at least 2 other guides to current level in order to continue the game, meaning you'll be trotting around low-level areas and riding monkeys for hours. I'm saying all this because there are 2 major traps set for any unknowing players just trying to see the end of the game. 1. There are not enough missions to hit cap without completing every single guide. And 2, the fact that you will need a scavenger nano in order to finish the game unless you plan on completing the entire quest log, and even then, you'll run into some speed traps along the way. Scavenger nanos increase fusion matter gained from missions and enemies, but not races, which I haven't spoken about yet. Scavenge nanos boost your fusion matter gain by 20%, increased to 24% when given a gumball, which either strengthens an effect or increases the amount of stamina a nano has. Being able to use scavenge nanos on mission turn ends is something the game really should tell you about, but doesn't, which leads me to believe that it was a happy accident. Anyway, changing Buttercup to Scavenge as soon as possible is important. If you're doing all of the future missions, you should be able to do it before you enter the past. If not, you'll get it a bit later, just don't wait too long because the cost of switching shoots up as you level up. The Dex Labs robot shopkeeper next to Nano machines sells nano power items, but using your scroll wheel makes you go straight to the top or bottom of any menu. So you will straight up miss the scavenge power item if you don't drag the bar down with your cursor. This sucks, and I genuinely thought that they just didn't sell the scavenge power for a while when I was replaying the game. After helping reconstruct Dexter's time capsule by working with the remaining Cartoon Network characters in the future, you'll be able to reach the past. This is where the game really begins. Upon reaching the past, you'll be met with the gorgeous Computress, a guide mission, and a futuristic floating Kids Next Door treehouse, which most of your low-level missions will come from. This is also your introduction to the suburbs, which is characterized by mostly bright blue skyboxes, aesthetically pleasing housing that players can jump and climb all over, grass, swimming pools that aren't yet contaminated, parks, leisure areas, fencing. Sometimes a lot of houses don't have separated yards, and most importantly, verticality as means of traversal that gets players accustomed to looking for shortcuts and platforming. Playing through this early portion of the game, despite doing it 3 times recently, is always an absolute joy for me. I have fond memories of playing this game as a child, so my brain never really tires of this world and its stories. Every sector of the map feels like a monument that I can now visit whenever I want. With that being said, if you've played FusionFall, you might feel that its gameplay is a bit lacking, and that is true, but I want you to also think about what other MMOs played like at the time. Even today, the most popular MMOs, Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, are tab target games, differentiating themselves with fun boss mechanics and classes separated mostly by class fantasy. But for many players, it's about how high your actions per minute, or APM, need to be. MMO players get bored pretty easily. If a class is too simple, they'll say things like baby class, play ninja. These same players will end up with a dunce hat. I am of the belief that artificial difficulty in design is weird and unnecessary. I main Warrior in FF14. I got attached to it really quickly and just never switched. The simplicity of Warrior's abilities and low APM requirements don't change the fact that I still have to avoid mechanics. Not most of them, I'll admit, but a lot of them. And this certainly never bored me, because the fantasy of being an axe-wielding, bloodthirsty berserker never once got old to me, despite how easy the class makes most of the game. The way I feel about Warrior is the same way I feel about FusionFall. While it's not a tab target game, and even though I hesitate to call it an action combat game, that is most similar to its design. Sort of like Guild Wars 2. You can choose between targeted attacks or aimed attacks, but the decision is in the weapons you choose in FusionFall. There are 4 weapon types. Rifles and pistols are practically the same, dealing single target damage, which you cannot shift to the other enemies unless you get far enough away from the first or kill one. Melee weapons are literally scatterguns, but worse, because you will always take damage, not being able to kite enemies backwards, on top of the fact that ranged enemies will aggro you first, dealing at least 1 or 2 attacks before you get to do anything. There's some really confusing UI with the weapons that could lead you to believe that a single target weapon deals damage to multiple targets, but the split damage numbers are legitimately only for scatterguns and the like. Next is rockets. There are only 2 free aim weapon types, and they suck. In base FusionFall, not only do they have the same damage reduction for single enemies that scatterguns and melee weapons have, but they only achieve normal damage on faraway enemies depending on where the projectiles collide. The damage on these can get so low they don't do any damage at all, but the damage cap on them also is not very high in the first place. If you miss due to weird geography, elevation, or just bad aim, you might as well open your inventory and equip a real weapon. Speaking of useless garbage, throwables are the other free aim weapon type. I tried multiple times to get one of these to hit anything and just couldn't, so I have no footage of them dealing any damage. Anyway, throwables are the only entities that utilize physics in the entirety of FusionFall. After throwing them, they'll bounce around on any and every polygon they encounter till exploding after a set amount of time. You will never hit anything with these, and I truly hope you don't, because if you manage to, you'll just be aggroing something you'll never hit again, because these don't explode on contact and have a smaller blast radius than a pop rock. Small interjection here, since I play the game on FusionFall Retribution, and most of my footage was from like a year ago or more. Since then, they have made changes to throwables and rockets. They deal quite a bit of damage now. They actually work. They function. I don't have a whole lot of footage of this still, just because I don't like them, but I do have some of it from the Halloween event, which it was pretty fun and cool, and I don't know, use whatever you like now. Oh yeah, swords are pretty cool too. A handful of servers make balance changes to whichever weapons and nano powers. I won't be talking about that in depth because most of the people playing FusionFall will just pick a random server to play on, and I don't feel like discussing the balance of a 15-year-old game made for children, which isn't even officially active anymore. But yeah, most of my footage is from the Retribution server, which heavily buffed melee and rockets, which is why you might see them actually dealing damage in the clips I show. Since I already started, we might as well talk about your full toolset, at least the major ones that you'll be using throughout the entire game. The Nanos are your abilities. Saying that sounded as gross as calling Mount Moon a dungeon. Sidetrack. One time I had a friend playing PokeMMO with me, and she said Mount Moon is the first major dungeon. I felt such disgust from her saying that, because calling places like Mount Moon and Eterna Forest dungeons removes the whimsy and deconstructs these fantasy locations into standard RPG dungeons. Yuck. Anyways, Nanos are, your 3 ability slots. This is one of the coolest systems ever put into an MMO. Not only do chibi Cartoon Network characters stand in for your normal skills that otherwise would be a gear attachment or something, but they look cool doing it. Ever seen one of these? Hotbars full of actives, items, and active passives are a staple of the MMO genre. They gatekeep a lot of people without cracking hands from even trying MMOs. FusionFall needed to be easy enough for children to jump in and play with very little mechanical skill or even knowledge of gaming in general. So instead of multiple hotbars, you get 1, 2, and 3. Your left hand is already resting directly below them and are the easiest number keys to reach. Aside from just being easy to remember and press, only having 3 keys does another great thing for FusionFall in creating individuality. FusionFall is intentionally easy, meaning you can get away with completing the game using almost any combination of nanos, meaning you can just walk around with whatever your favorite characters are and not have to worry about meta or if you have the damage to complete a dungeon. Now, I'm not gonna lie and say your nano choices don't matter, because not taking a decent set will make your playthrough much longer than it needs to be. Some nano powers just straight up don't do anything in default FusionFall, and some are practically required for completing the game before you're too old to care anymore. Being limited to 3 nano slots means that you have to make choices between mobility, damage, healing, and utility. I lied. One of those choices is made for you because you need at least 1 healing nano if you don't want to wait a good 20 seconds in between each and every fight. There are no healing items in this game, meaning your healing during combat comes exclusively from nanos, and waiting to heal outside of combat is like watching paint dry. When I was a kid, this game is what truly taught me the concept of patience. Waiting in between each fight to auto-heal is what gave me that skill. Anyway, you're left with 2 slots by default essentially. For convenience, until the endgame, I kept a scavenge nano with me at all times so I wouldn't have to switch every time I was ready to turn in a mission. Meaning, really, there's only 1 free slot. Early on, I chose a stun cone nano like Blossom because those few seconds enemies aren't hitting you means less healing and less consumables, which I haven't gotten to yet. In the mid-game, that slot goes to a rocket nano. Vertical mobility is so important in this game it's unreal, but I'll save that for when we get to the movement section of the video. There are 20 different nano powers in FusionFall. Each server seems to balance these differently, making it really hard for me to correctly tell you what each of these does for a fact. In some cases, servers change what some of the powers do entirely, meaning I could straight up be lying to you, depending on where you choose to play the game. So instead of outlining every single nano power, I'll just tell you which ones do what by default. Antidote. Useless. Bonus makes you receive more Taros, which is money, while beating monsters and turning in missions. Freedom. Useless. Guard. Useless. Radar. Useless. Run. Changes your movement speed from 600 to 800. Scavenge. We've talked about this and will continue to talk about it later. Sneak reduces your aggro range depending on the difference in level between enemies. This is really helpful for going places that you're too low level to fight in. Treasure Finder, useless. Damage does what it says, not enough for how high the cooldown is though. Drain is crazy, it deals max health damage over time to enemies, meaning this is your go-to bossing skill. Without setting Eduardo to drain, you cannot kill the future area bosses alone. Drain nanos are so effective they are never not useful, even with a relatively long cooldown. Health. You will be using at minimum 1 health nano or you will have a bad time. Leech deals damage and heals you for a portion of the damage dealt. The server that I played on nerfed this dramatically for some reason, even though the game is in no way competitive outside of races. Not that the leaderboards are visible in the first place, because apparently they just forgot. Recall. Infected zones have recall points which you can teleport back to as long as you have both interacted with one and have a nano with the power. I want to say these are useless, but I'm sure a fair few players have gotten mileage out of these. Sleep. Useless. If you want to sneak past enemies, just use a sneak nano. Snare. Why is this even in the game? Stun does what it says. This will not only hold enemies still for a couple of seconds, but stop them from attacking you, whether they're ranged or melee. Only the stun cone variant of this ability seems to work consistently for me. It's capable of stunning up to 3 enemies at a time, and will help you in the battle of attrition that is the entirety of FusionFall. Revive isn't useless per se, but you could just have a nano in that slot that would prevent you from dying in the first place. You also need to have the nano active in order to trigger the revive passive. Just don't use this one unless you think the manga is cool like me. I saved Jump and Rocket for last because they are the 2 most important powers in the game. Jump makes you
jump good,
and Rocket gives you a burst of vertical movement. These nanos will not only reduce the amount of time you'll have to spend waiting during platforming sections, but can literally break the game. Most glitches have something to do with the fact that you can practically launch yourself out of the map with one or both of these. While inside of Fusion Layers, you really only need a rocket nano to skip every monster and trivialize the dungeons entirely. I'm uncertain if this was intentional, but it's well known that you can just jump across the ceilings of Fusion Layers to save tons of time. This is one of, if not the biggest time save in all of FusionFall. So long as a mission doesn't require you to fight whatever is in a layer, you can skip 90% of them so long as they have high ceilings and low enough hills to climb. There aren't so many nano powers that I couldn't have just read them straight off the wiki, but honestly half of them don't even do anything, and when it comes to making the most out of all 3 slots, your best choices will always be health, rocket, and one free slot to do whatever with. But I will say that each main nano power has a potential subtype of self, group, area, and cone. This gets weird with the passive nano powers like run because this game was meant to be cooperative, but the game never got any expansions or raids to test these out, so a lot of group and area powers are just useless aside from one factor. If you have nanos with the exact same power and subtype, they will share a cooldown. But if you have a different subtype, you can get away with stacking the same power up to 3 times, with the difference being that the group and area powers are less potent than self and single target powers. Anyway, this means that for really stat-checky portions of the game, you can just stack 3 heal nanos and become practically invincible. If you have a group of 4 doing this, you could really become invincible because there aren't any one-shot mechanics in the game. A lot of fan additions to the game just stack damage onto you and are meant to be played in a group, but I was stubborn and played through the entire game by myself twice. At last we reach Consumables. These don't all unlock until you reach the past, so I just didn't talk about them for a while. There are 3 consumable items. The ones that take up inventory space are gumballs. These either boost the potency of your nano powers, or in the case of heal and run-like powers, increase the amount of energy your nanos have for a brief time. I actually don't know how long these boosts last. I guess around 10 minutes unless you die, then you lose the boost unless whatever server you're playing on removed that inconvenience. The 3 gumball types are color matched to the 3 nano types, which I just call red, blue, and yellow, or A, B, and C. I know I didn't talk about the nano types because I'm saving it for combat. The last 2 consumable types don't take up inventory space, but do have a cap of 9,999 at any given time. You're actually allowed to overspend on these, so be careful. They're sold in increments of 100. Nano potions recover your nano's energy meter to full. I'm not going to do the math on it, but that's why sometimes you'll end up using like 50 nano potions and other times it's about 100 or something. This is dependent on how much energy was missing at the time of use, so letting your nano drop to near empty sometimes isn't optimal if you're on a budget. Weapon boosts increase the amount of damage you deal with weapons. You cannot control the usage of these boosts at all, so it's a real commitment if you opt into buying them. Enemies can drop all 3 consumable types. You might never need to buy a gumball if you're lucky enough, but you will run out of nano and especially weapon boosts if you never buy them. Now that we're all caught up, we can talk about combat. Buy weapon boost. In the mid to late game, unless you're hyper-focused on collecting and need every taro you can get your hands on for trading with other players, you will never run out of money, so spending on potions and boost is not an issue. I feel that nano potions are widely accepted as a necessity, but I've seen a lot of talk about weapon boost being a taro sink, and I wish I hadn't accepted that sentiment on my first playthrough because these things turn 5 and 6 shot kills into 3 and sometimes 2 shot kills, or with a server specific rocket buff, weapon boosts just turn you into a 1-shot machine. Not only does this increase your damage, but ultimately reduces the amount of damage you'll take, healing you'll need to do, and time it'll take to fight through long kill missions. Combat is otherwise straightforward. Enemies will either spawn spread out, requiring the use of single target weapons, or in groups of 3 or 4, the 4th member being a larger version of the enemy type with more HP. You'll learn to be thankful for grouped up enemies when it comes to RNG drop missions and kill missions in general, because you'll be killing them so much faster while grouped up than while spread out. Fusion monsters have a few special attacks that they can use at random. They don't use them commonly till mid to late game, but can as soon as you reach the past. The first being Fusion Eruption, a small AoE attack that gives the player a few seconds to walk out of. Getting hit with this will not deal your entire health bar usually, but will hurt a lot. Good for Final Fantasy players because not a single one of you seems to be capable of moving out of a 5-second telegraph in a game that you've played for hundreds of hours. This mechanic being present makes me think that combat would have eventually become a bit more dynamic in the open world, and especially during boss battles, which we really only get one of in Lord Fuse. Sometimes you'll be stunned by enemies. This usually only happens when fighting groups, but sometimes single enemies do it too. I don't know what triggers this, and there's no indication, but the stun often leads into death by eruption or straight up getting jumped. The most common special attack enemies will use is the drain attack, or as I call them, color attacks. If you have a Nano out, enemies will often try to drain energy from them. Blue beats red, red beats yellow, and yellow beats blue, or ABC. Kids could associate this with Pokemon type matchups like water and fire, so memorizing it isn't too hard, but a lot of people had no idea how this system worked, or why the Nanos even had different colors in the first place, and to this day I still see discussion about this. It's not information that you need to complete the game, but it will make it a whole lot faster, because during these drain attacks, enemies are invulnerable. But if you win the color matching game, they'll take a large burst of damage and recover your Nano's energy. Losing means your Nano loses energy instead. If you're not too confident in your memorization skills, you can always just recall your Nano during these attacks, in which case you'll just receive a normal amount of damage afterwards. This facet of combat is what really keeps you invested during combat. It feels so good to win multiple of these color battles in a row during combat that I sometimes felt an adrenaline rush. Too bad this doesn't happen often enough, but certainly could have had the game been given more time to expand. Let's go on a side quest. I initially went into this project out of a weird mix of love for FusionFall and spite for most creators covering the game not actually talking about the game, but all of the outside factors that led to its creation and closing. And while those feelings are still there, I realized I could take this opportunity to talk about literally anything FusionFall related instead of just the things other people ignored. You may have noticed I haven't mentioned the names of companies or contributors to FusionFall, and that's because I wanted to keep the game feeling like a video game. This isn't to discredit anyone who worked on the game or is currently working to keep FusionFall alive. I just feel that those topics have been spoken about at length in literally every other FusionFall video. But, with that being said, Mark Hamill reprised his role as Sticky Beard for FusionFall. There isn't a lot of voice acting in the game outside of the tutorial, but most characters just have a hello and goodbye, saying, I think this is really funny that Luke Skywalker entered a studio to record like 2 lines for Sticky Beard for FusionFall.
I'll be dipped in chocolate before I let a blasted vegetable do anyone in.
I think Mark Hamill just loves acting. We ain't done yet, the tism is still tisming. FusionFall has a one-chapter manga that shows the beginning of Fuse's invasion and the Cartoon Network characters working together to stop it. But the one thing that truly caught my attention and that I really needed to talk about was Computress canonically wanting to fuck Professor Utonium. Looking at him with those hungry eyes and shit, the professor hugs her after their plan works and she gets all flustered. What was Dexter cooking in that lab? Why can she be horny? Can I get one? So the line between Grigon developers and Cartoon Network developers is kind of invisible. Grigon Entertainment developed the game FusionFall and its mechanics and overall feel, but a lot of the character and world building came straight from the Cartoon Network team. People don't really talk about this, and for good reason. There isn't a lot of readily available information on the exact details of the responsibilities that each team had. Like, it's out there, but you really have to dig for it. Anyway, after Grigon shut down, the full responsibility of upkeep fell on the Cartoon Network team. At this time, in-game, you could see people talking about the game potentially shutting down because Grigon went bankrupt, and I'm sitting here, 10 years old, pretending to be 18. What's a bankrupt? I remember seeing such a genuine concern that FusionFall was closing a lot earlier than it actually did, because this kind of thing doesn't really happen. MMOs do get bounced between publishers from time to time, and when that happens, it usually means a full server reset, but after Grigon, nothing happened, like nothing at all happened. The game was in maintenance mode essentially until the Cartoon Network team stepped up and announced with fervor that the game would be receiving more content outside of the Academy update. That didn't really happen because FusionFall wasn't making any money, but the fact that the game was held together with sticks and glue for so long was pretty cool. Usually, after a company goes under, the publishing rights to an MMO will be sold to another company like Gamago, and your favorite MMO will be ruined beyond repair. But FusionFall was in this odd middle ground between Gregon and Cartoon Network, so it just stayed. I don't quite remember where I stopped talking about the actual game, because, like, some of that wasn't in the script. As we progress through the suburbs, you'll start to notice how many locations have fast travel points and fast-ish travel points. I imagine at some point the devs removed a handful of scampers, which are instant teleportation, in favor of the Monkey Skyway agents, because the longer it takes a player to get from mission to mission, the longer their parents would have to pay a subscription fee. When the game begins, you'll encounter a lot of scampers throughout the suburbs, probably because it's such a large portion of the map. But there are also a lot of those damn dirty monkeys. There are 4 main areas in FusionFall: the suburbs, the wilds, downtown, and the Darklands. Aside from the suburbs, each other main area only gets 1 scamper, because player retention was how this game made money. There weren't any microtransactions, no battle passes, just a subscription fee, and website traffic. The monkey rides can sometimes take up to 2 minutes or longer. They look pretty cool though. Since the game is truly open world, while riding a monkey you can see every other entity below and around you, including monsters and other players. It used to be really fun having full conversations with friends while riding a monkey to the same place. Some of the fondest memories I have are doing just that. Anyways, I fucking hate these monkeys. Vehicles weren't in the game at launch. Dex Labs Upgrade 1, Speed and Style, introduced them, and let me tell you, this changed everything. Not needing a run nano to move a decent speed outside of infected zones and fusion layers made the game so much faster. FusionFall was a walking simulator for 8 months. Outside of one exceptionally large infected zone and races, run nanos were obsolete. Good. Vehicle vendors aren't normally available in the suburbs though, so if you're just starting out the game, you're gonna want to find one ASAP. And because this game is, again, truly open world, you can just walk to one of the higher level areas that has a vehicle vendor. The easiest one to reach is Mount Blackhead at level 12, though the path is confusing and you'll need Magus with the sneak power to reach it without dying. It's doable. You could also take the bus and head straight from most areas of the suburbs to downtown. Oh, I want to talk about that fucking bus so bad. This game really promotes exploration in a way that most others just don't. Simply because you cannot fight anything in a given area does not mean that you can't go to said area. This is, by far, the most enjoyable aspect of FusionFall, the freedom to go literally anywhere you want at any time, even if you have no legitimate reason to be there. FusionFall just lets you play around in the open world the second you step foot into the past. Even the future isn't exactly small, just much smaller in comparison. I know there isn't a lot to do in the open world aside from platforming and general exploration, but allowing the full freedom of exploration in a kid's game, or any game for that matter, is really cool, and the main reason I decided to make this video. And since we're on the topic of the open world, let's talk about the transition from the suburbs to the wilds. Around level 12, you'll start receiving missions near and around Foster's home, which is conveniently next to absolutely nothing. It is beside the entrance to the wilds, but it's also gated off by a gaggle of gatekeeping scribble spawns that will group and kill you faster than you can run most of the time. This is a pretty cool problem-solving area in FusionFall because you can try to just get high enough level or brute force your way through the scribble spawns with a party, or you could try to sneak your way through. This is fun and really good for children. This helps them develop a problem-solving ability. The player is presented with an area that they want to go and they know that they will need to go. It's about how they're going to end up getting there. After finding your way through the scribble spawns, you'll make your trek to Camp Kidney. The paths are mighty confusing though. FusionFall's map is terrible. Yeah, it'll show your exact location, but you're represented by an equilateral triangle, which is a triangle that has all three sides even in length. Because of this, you'll never be able to tell where you're facing without some cross-referencing in the open world. I find myself opening and closing the map often just to try and get back to the unmarked NPCs or monkeys. You also cannot mark this map, so if something shows up in a place that is in fact not there, which will happen like 5 times exactly in one mid-game area called the Catacombs, you're out of luck. The map also doesn't do well with its edges and corners. Most of the traversable area is reasonably centered on the map, so zooming in and out is not an issue. But again, the Catacombs, which is on the edge of existence, zooming in and on exact locations and moving your map view is incredibly difficult, or in some spaces, impossible. The map will be a more prevalent issue during the endgame, which I will talk about in detail when we get there. Anyway, the beginning area of the wilds has a crazy invisible wall blocking creative players from just walking across the map instead of following the trail to the camp. This wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't incredibly easy to accidentally go down the wrong path and get stuck on the other side of the wall, making you backtrack for like 15 minutes or more. I genuinely hate this part of the game. Not the wilds in general, just the transition to it. As where the suburb sectors were generally similar, while not being exactly samey, every part of the wilds somehow feels entirely distinct from one another. Not only due to its use of different skyboxes spread throughout, but also the landmarks. At first, you might think the wilds are a bit boring in comparison to the colorful and vertical suburbs, but the deeper you go, the more you see just how different and charming each area really is. The transitions between zones with different skyboxes alone is enough for me to turn around and get a double take. There are also sparsely used particle effects in certain areas which look natural while walking, but stand out a lot while flying. There's so much going on in the wilds, I can't do it justice with just words, so I'll have to make do with letting you see for yourselves throughout the video. However, something that I absolutely have to show you right now is Forgotten Falls. This area is the reason I even started playing the game again in the first place. I simply could not forget Forgotten Falls. Throughout the years the game was unavailable, I always regretted never personally getting any screenshots or videos of this place. And here it is. I can visit this virtual location anytime I want now. If not for some very dedicated game preservationist, this simply would not be possible. I am oddly fixated on this one area of a 16-year-old MMO that never really had any content besides one Nano mission, but I am certain many others feel this way about many places, like Sector V, Tech Square, Mount Blackhead, Orchid Bay, Nowhere, the list goes on. I'm just so happy that this game still exists. So shortly after entering the wilds, you'll make your way to the first major hub area of FusionFall, Mount Blackhead. Think of this place as FusionFall's Limsa Lominsa. Oh fuck, don't do that. This was the area most players aggregated while not doing missions, grinding, or racing. That's because Mount Blackhead is a level 14 area that pretty much anyone could reach as early as level 11, sooner with a friend or really good pathing through the wilds. Also, most missions requiring transit between the 4 major areas of the game had a nice middle ground found there. The Mount Blackhead scamper could take you to any other scamper. The monkey wasn't so generous, because you'd often need at least 2 monkey rides to go anywhere within the wilds itself, but due to its scamper, you'd see players at all levels just hanging out. Mount Blackhead also served as the game's unofficial trade center, meaning this is where most players would meet up to buy and barter for items. Now it's a ghost town. But this is still the area you'll see the most players crossing through on any server because of its access to every other part of the map. My friends and I used to hang out on this airplane, specifically the wing piece that was invisible for a really long time. None of us realized that it was a missing texture because we were kids and online gaming was relatively new at the time, so we thought it was just a fun little glitch spot that we were floating on. Let's go on a side quest. I remember a lot of useless information about FusionFall and the people that played it, which I have no legitimate proof of because I was like 10, and you'll just have to take my word for some, if not most of the things I say related to conversations or anecdotes. But one absolute fact is the first person to beat the final boss of FusionFall, Lord Fuse, was Steel Zonzan. An odd little piece of FusionFall history that most people don't seem to talk about or even remember is the pillar of the community that Steel Zonzan really was. As the first person to beat Fuse, they were also the first person to hit the level 36 cap. FusionFall was a really long game, made even longer in its first 8 months because there were no vehicles. The average playtime eventually trickled down to around 40 to 50 hours after some updates and after people making second characters to optimize the game's runtime. But then there's Steel, who, if I remember correctly, said that they played the game non-stop for a few days and found races to be so fun they stopped doing missions and hit the level cap faster than anyone else as told to them by the FusionFall team. They also got a gift box with a FusionFall shirt and some other stuff I forgot about for being world's first. Steel, Ursula, Zonzan, whatever you'd like to be called, if you're somehow watching this video, please hit me up. I'd love to know what was in that box, or maybe even do an interview of some sort. Now, keep in mind, I'm taking this information from conversations I had with them and others when I was a child, so my memory might be off, and if anyone has corrections or details about literally anything I'm talking about now, please leave a comment. I haven't talked about this yet, but after completing missions that give access to fusion layers, including Fuse's lair, you can't enter those dungeons ever again without the help of someone else that does have the mission, and for that reason, Steel made an alt character named Ursula Zonzan. The Ursula Zonzan character not only acted as a second friend list, but a gateway to show people who did not have access to the Fuse fight the final boss. Steel would regularly take people who weren't at level cap or no longer had the mission into the Fuse fight so everyone could experience it. If for whatever reason you just didn't have the time to grind to 36 or just wanted to see the final boss again, Steel Zonzan and eventually other players would just take people into the dungeon, then delete the mission to reset it, gaining permanent entry to the last and only real boss fight in the entire game. Some players would charge a taro fee for this service. I don't remember if Steel did it though, so eventually the Ursula Zonzan character would become the main character they'd play on due to all of the party requests for Fuse. It would also be the character they did most of their racing on. There was a point in time that Ursula Zonzan had pretty much every infected zone's top score, which was especially funny before the leaderboards were available on the FusionFall website, because it was like walking into a Pokemon gym and seeing your rival's name. By using the Wayback Machine, you can still see the more prominent racers throughout the years, and that Ursula Zonzan held at least one score at Loch Ness till 2011, the year FusionFall closed. Back when the leaderboards were originally posted on the website, Cartoon Network also ran a commercial showing off the feature, along with the name Ursula Zonzan typed into the search bar. This was really cool to see as a kid, recognition that someone important sees player contribution to FusionFall history, even if it isn't your name on the TV screen. Just knowing that the FusionFall team, and by extension, Cartoon Network knew we existed was pretty cool. Oh yeah, they show the leaderboard in the commercial. There aren't any real player names, just NPCs, because I guess it would have looked weird if only one name appeared throughout the entire page. I know it might seem a little odd of me to focus on a single player for so long, and no, I am not Steel Zonzan, but if you happen to be watching this video, I would love to chat and pick your brain about this short few years in time. But I really only brought all this up because there aren't many records of things that happened in the FusionFall MMO. Sure, people discuss the past amongst themselves in Discord and even the few servers that are thankfully still up, but there aren't a whole lot of videos or even blog posts remaining from those old days that are easily found. So I thought it would be nice to bring up a name from the past here or there. Stepping back a bit to media that is immortalized, the FusionFall commercials. A lot of these were propaganda to get young people in on the fight against Fuse and their parents to pay the $6 sub fee. But something I absolutely need to talk about is the music used in these commercials and the one Cartoon Network played the most around the game's launch. This was a CGI trailer used for the game similar to those Square Enix uses for Final Fantasy, which looks pretty enticing. It starts with the beginning of Planet Fusion's invasion of Earth and people audibly panicking, which leads to an instrumental of Crystal Skull by Mastodon playing for the first half of the advertisement. As Ben gets saved from a fusion monster, what will commonly be the main theme for most of the FusionFall commercials following starts playing, an instrumental of Jet Black New Year by Thursday. And this shit fucks. I've done a lot of digging and cannot find any information about the licensing deal that took place to get Crystal Skull and Jet Black New Year into this trailer. And that's likely because these songs were written by two very adult bands, and Cartoon Network likely did not want to be directly associated with either. Crystal Skull is about crystal addiction. I haven't listened to this song a whole lot, but I have looped Jet Black New Year many times. From the way Jeff Rickley talks about it at concerts, I can only assume it's about partying as if the world were about to end because fuck this year sucked, maybe next year won't, but who gives a shit. Gerard Way performed background vocals for Jet Black New Year. He would sometimes show up and perform this song with them. Eventually, a version of the cinematic trailer aired that replaced Crystal Skull with generic tech sounds. But Jet Black New Year remained. I can only assume these two songs were someone on the FusionFall team's favorite songs at the time because they're just so specific. There was funding behind this project, so a song could have been written to go along with the already very good-looking CGI trailer, but instead we got childhood-defining rock instrumentals that some of us had to look up when we were old enough to realize those might be real songs. For ads about game updates, they'd usually have a guy with a funny voice talking about the new stuff that they added. At some point, Cartoon Network stopped producing advertisements for FusionFall and just started shortening already existing commercials. Alright, back to the main quest. FusionFall spends its early game getting players who are likely children that never played an MMO before used to mission turn-ins and map traversal. Getting you familiarized with pathing and combat in general was one of its major goals, considering its audience. With that being said, the introduction to the mid-game is where FusionFall is at its best, and not only does it lead you into the wilds, but simultaneously does it drive you into downtown, essentially opening up the entire visible map for exploration and questing. You'll be spending levels 9 through 12 around Ennsville, which is the bottom left part of the suburbs, which has a particularly high difficulty spike in terms of both combat and platforming. If you're struggling with this area, especially as a kid, it can feel a bit grim because of the dark green skybox, along with the area being much less forgiving. It can really knock the wind out of your sails. Not to say that I dislike this part of the game, it's incredibly charming, just obtuse in its difficulty at times. But because of that, it serves as a great transition to the downtown area. Going downtown for the first time is just so different. Many players likely took the bus all the way downtown just to see where it went, and that alone is so cool. But even if you just follow the missions guiding you toward the downtown area, you'll still be in for a treat. Upon reaching downtown, you'll first see an area that is a bit warm, with a gray skybox, which helps slowly shift the darker tone of Ennsville to something much more vibrant altogether. And then you see it. The sky turns bright blue, tall buildings that look like the future, digital signs everywhere, and strange interconnecting skyways. This is downtown. Let's talk about functional architecture in video games. I plan on making a video series about just this topic soon, but the reason for that is FusionFall. The game is filled with buildings and bridges that just beg you to step and ride all over them. I would like for computers to... Architecture is the art and technique of designing and building. Generally, we call buildings, bridges, stairs, railways, and the like architecture. Most open-world video games and most games in general include architecture as set pieces or nice-looking backgrounds to flesh out a world and make it look lived in, or in the case of apocalypse scenarios, dilapidated or ruined. And in most cases, though the architecture looks fantastic, the player cannot interact with it in any meaningful way. I have played an unhealthy amount of Grand Theft Auto 5. It is safe to say that it's a comfort game for me. There are several types of buildings you can just walk into by opening a door leading to a physical space with interactable NPCs and minigames. Those buildings being ammunitions, convenience stores, clothing stores, bars, Franklin, Trevor, and Michael's homes, but not the properties you can buy and certain locations like houses and banks that you can only enter during specific missions. These buildings that you can just waltz into without a loading screen makes the world feel just that much more real and enhance immersion by a lot. And when I say immersion, I don't mean that I want to forget I'm playing a video game. I mean I want the world I'm playing in to feel connected tangibly and not by interlinking several instanced areas together to make one world. Del Piero Pier is like the magnum opus of functional architecture in GTA, huge wooden pier that is physically held up by wooden pilings, lodged into the earth beneath the very real and very tangible water that you can and will interact with during missions or just casual play in the sandbox. Enemies use the pilings as cover during gunfights. Players can take advantage of the small space beneath the pier to evade police or outboat the larger vehicles they use on water. There is a fully functioning roller coaster on Del Piero alongside a beach that can and will beach your seafaring vehicles if parked on the sand. These, aside from the beach that I just think is cool, are examples of functional architecture in video games. You wanna know what isn't? These circles of light that just teleport you into buildings. Consistent with the overworld, you get loaded into an instance being a portion of the game not connected to the main world. Now, GTA 5's buildings are a little odd because they are physically placed in the same plane of existence the rest of Los Santos is. Proof of this is hearing and seeing explosions outside of an apartment window in GTA Online, or just the fact that you can hear outside activity no matter what house you happen to be in. The fact remains that this isn't nearly as immersive as just walking into a building through a door that physically opens and closes. Aside from that, most buildings in GTA 5 are just there to make up the look of a city instead of being places that you can actually enter. As is with most video games, including FusionFall, Watch Dogs 2 has a lot of functional architecture which is meant to give you options of approach towards missions, or just plain fun. The Noodle Campus, which is used for a story mission, can be fully accessed at any point in the game just for fun along with the rest of San Francisco. Let me tell you how worked up this Skyway makes me. Not only can you just walk in and out of these buildings at will, but this bridge has automatic doors on both ends like those fancy hotels you only sleep in during conventions. Walking through these doors and people watching through the glass is better than sex. Hey, this part of the video might seem a bit weird and choppy, and that's because I had to cut quite a bit out of it. When I originally wrote this part of the script, I was gassing up Genshin Impact because of its many instances of functional architecture. That and some other games that I just lost the footage for, but mostly just know that I lost about 20 minutes of video because I simply refuse to endorse a gacha game. Even if only 5 or 10 people watch this video, I would rather not potentially get anyone hooked by the nasty grips of a gacha game. I fucking love functional architecture in video games, and that love originated during my time playing FusionFall. Even though you can't walk inside of buildings, you're encouraged to climb, jump, and shortcut all over and around them. The shortest path to point B is a straight line, and you can often beeline for objectives with the right nanos. The downtown bus is so fucking cool. In the late game, you'll have no use for it because of all the teleporting and monkey riding you'll be doing, along with the possibility of just moving faster than it can if your server has custom vehicles, but early on it's actually kinda useful, especially for getting to higher level areas without getting one shot or to help you finish timed missions along its path. Downtown also has other railways, but with no buses attached. I assume these were removed at some point in development due to clutter or technical limitations considering how they'd have to render for X amount of players. I usually use the railway as safe passage over annoying areas when leaving City Station. There are also springs littered all over downtown, helping players get atop buildings and railways. Most of this has nothing to do with questing, but is just fun. You can take advantage of the verticality of downtown to avoid the literal minefields of fusion monsters everywhere, or just to get a good view of that hologram or billboard you've been trying to read. The box fort around the cul-de-sac is a prime example of functional architecture, as silly as it is. It serves a narrative purpose as a means of keeping out fusion monsters in a way the Ed boys would think to do, but simultaneously serves as a conditioning tool getting players used to thinking vertically. Many of the missions around the cul-de-sac aren't exactly far, but going around the box fort each time would triple your playtime in that area. While seeing that the wall is scalable, even young children will start to see how useful and fun the buildings and boost pads are. A lot of FusionFall is functional architecture, from bridges to housing to the downtown bus. Everything feels purposeful and fun to traverse. Okay, back to downtown. Making it here feels like the grind was worth it. Sure, it doesn't take long, but odds are you were led into the wilds first, which aren't too appealing at first glance. We've all seen endless forest and tall hills with invisible walls blocking what would be shortcuts in every other MMO we've played, but a city? That's rare. Even today, most MMOs have a hard fantasy vibe that doesn't allow for high-tech areas like downtown, but FusionFall was set in a world already mixed with Cartoon Network shows, so downtown just fits. After gaining scampers in both downtown and the wilds, FusionFall really unlocks and you've entered the mid-game. I see the mid-game as levels 12 through 22 for a very particular set of reasons that I will talk about later, but just know that this is the most fun stretch of game that FusionFall has to offer because it isn't worried about keeping your sub running. It's just letting you play the game. Missions are given in clusters in the same map sectors, or ones close enough to walk or take a single monkey ride, meaning you can just complete them, get 4 to 5 turn-ins at the same time, then repeat. The missions in FusionFall generally are a mix of kill X number of enemies and retrieve quest items, but typically you'll be doing both of these things in a single quest, making them feel less like fetch quests than cutting down trees and breaking rocks. Seriously, why does anyone put that in their games? Nobody likes that. Speaking of, FusionFall is profoundly messy in the way it uses quest interactables. Typically in MMOs, quest items just appear in the open world or instance you happen to be in, only when you have a quest that triggers their appearance, and only for you, or whoever else happens to do the quest alongside you. FusionFall has quest interactables just lying about everywhere. It isn't all that noticeable on a first playthrough, but if you're a returning player, you'll definitely remember at least a few of these and the reasons that they're there. You'll mostly find these inside infected zones, which I needed to talk about anyway. Infected zones are major quest areas that most missions will lead you into. I believe every Nano mission, aside from Max, will end inside of an infected zone. While infected zones are places you'll have to teleport or load into, they are not separate from the open world in the way that fusion layers are. The barriers separating them from the outside world prevent you from interacting with anything on the opposite side, meaning you cannot cheese quest interactables or kill monsters through the barriers. You can, however, see players on opposite sides of the barriers, which is really cool when other people are online. When inside of the infected zone, you might see other players doing missions alongside you, even if you aren't in the same party, making this game feel truly massively multiplayer, back when it was officially online. The infected zones are also where races take place. While you don't directly race other players, they function more like time trials in Mario Kart. This is the only form of competition in the entirety of FusionFall, and the only activity available after completing every mission. Outside of races, the post-game is barren. You gain Taros and Fusion Matter by completing races, which scale with your level, so you don't have to worry about which races you prefer or what records you want to try for at the time. Scavenge nanos do not increase the amount of fusion matter you gain from races, so don't even bother. While racing, your objective is to collect as many of these floating fusion matter things as you can as fast as possible, then to turn them in. This is actually a really fun and great way to use FusionFall's platforming. The infected zones become larger and more complex as you level, which means there will always be some sort of escalating challenge even if the game's combat isn't hitting the spot for you. The most fun part about FusionFall gameplay-wise is finding your own routes through each infected zone. Each zone has a sort of intended on-rails approach that you can take to get around, or you can get creative and use nano powers like jump, rocket, and run to augment your movement and create shortcuts. Speaking of mobility, it's time to address the physics of FusionFall, or the lack thereof. FusionFall does use Unity's physics for the useless throwable weapons, however, movement is based entirely off of your current speed stat. This number does not mean anything on its own, but the default speed of a player character is 600. This is the slowest you will ever be able to walk, jump, or fall unless you were playing on an Academy version of the game, in which the Cartoon Network devs added a movement speed boost with clunky animation while free-falling to lessen the amount of time players spend literally just landing from high places, which I think takes away from the game personally, but suit yourself. Anyway, 600 is the base number for all of your walking and aerial movement. Momentum does not exist in FusionFall, which is actually a good thing because of this game primarily being a platformer. Gaining momentum would often mean the loss of player control over their character, meaning many platforming failures. In-game, the way Mario lands on platforms after a running start, and the way he steps forward a bit after landing even though you haven't given the forward input, or when you hold backwards after landing to have him brake and lose some of that momentum. FusionFall avoids this entirely by limiting your movement strictly to your input. Hold the W key, you walk forward with no wind-up time. When you release the W key, your character will instantly stop all forward movement. There are ways to increase your movement speed, such as run nanos and vehicles. Vehicles have different speeds, and you gain access to faster variants the higher level you are. They are only rentable, meaning a purchase of these lasts only 30 days, unless you are playing on a server with custom vehicles. Choosing between a vehicle and a run nano in the open world is a no-brainer. It just frees up a nano slot, with the only downside being the inability to use vehicles inside of infected zones and fusion layers, but overall speeding up your gameplay tremendously as fights become much less tedious with 2 or more combat-related nanos. I know I said you never fully lose control of your character's movement, and I wasn't exactly lying, but there are a few notable instances in which you have no choice but to commit to a burst of movement, being these dumb cannons, and when stepping on boost pads or using rocket nanos. I would have included the rocket boost laying around infected zones alongside the movement speed shoes and the jump feathers, but they don't seem to work on any of the servers I've played on, and I simply cannot get footage of them. While using the cannons, you'll be thrown forward after guessing a range on this meter. I hate these. Never at any point are these 100% helpful. You have to hope you picked the right range for whatever jump you want to make, and if you miss, it often means resetting or walking around till you find another way to the target location. The boost pads are pretty straightforward. You'll never really know how high they'll take you till you step on one, but you can probably guess since they're usually aimed at getting you to the next platform. With that all being said, this is where the game is most interesting. You might be thinking, all that jumping and boosting looks like momentum to me. Well, it's not, and I can prove it. This is something most players won't notice until they accidentally boost pad or rocket nano themselves into a ceiling, but if and when you do, you'll notice your character just hangs there for a bit. The first time this happened to me as a kid, I thought I was stuck in some weird rock formation at Devil's Bluff, but I fell back down seconds later, tried to jump again to get where I wanted in the first place, then realized something. I went back down, hit my head again, and confirmed it. Whenever you gain an upward boost, you will not begin to fall until the duration of the boost has ended. This looks and feels an awful lot like upward momentum, but really, whenever you gain a vertical boost, you're gaining a burst of decreasing movement speed. When that movement speed fully depletes, you'll be sent into your normal falling animation. The only difference with this speed buff is the fact that you cannot control if your player character goes up or down, in the way that you cannot stop yourself from falling, you can't stop yourself from rising, giving the illusion of momentum. You don't have to put this concept into as many words as I just did to grasp it, but figuring this out makes FusionFall so much more fun. Movement speed is not accrued over time, it is instantly gained. Movement speed is a state of being rather than something that wanes. Without a run nano or vehicle, you simply exist at 600 speed. Let's say you have an 800 speed vehicle. The exact second you activate it, you are 800 movement speed. You did not gradually raise from 600 to 800 over the course of 1.5 seconds, you simply shifted into a being that is 800 speed. On top of this, using a rocket nano completely cancels your falling animation and gains you a set amount of height on each usage with a low cooldown. Combining this with the knowledge that movement speed is a state of being means you gain the ability to make impossible looking horizontal movements, creating insane shortcuts and bending reality. Fully learning how movement works in FusionFall means never having to gauge whether or not you can make a jump. From that point on, you'll just know it as a fact. I know I just made a really big wordy deal about the movement system of a 16-year-old children's game, but you don't have to put any of what I said into words in order to figure out how any of it works. FusionFall's movement is intuitive. Eventually, you would just feel how everything works, even without the vocabulary or game design knowledge to really grasp why those systems are in place, because again, the game was made for children, who likely never even played a computer game before, let alone an MMO. I bet you're wondering why I haven't talked about the Cartoon Network characters yet. The short answer is, literally everyone else who talked about this game started their videos with that, and I got tired of hearing about them. The long answer is, you've listened to me this far, you probably don't care how long this takes. The Cartoon Network characters just feel natural to me. I've played a lot of FusionFall, I'd even say an unhealthy amount for this project alone being 2.5 playthroughs, and they just feel as normal or average to me as any other NPC in an MMO. Not to say that's a bad thing, it's great. All the characters are perfectly in character. Look at this annoying shit Billy says. Eddie's running scams. Mandark and Dexter are reluctantly working together to send you back and forth on missions while trying to ignore the other's accomplishments. And Princess tries to use Daddy's money to buy out Grimm's pot business. But I feel like pointing these things out first and foremost is a mild disservice to FusionFall as a video game because it is so much more than a Cartoon Network crossover event. The FusionFall team on Cartoon Network's end did a really solid job of providing world building. The areas, some of which are ripped directly out of Cartoon Network shows like Camp Kidney and Foster's Home, are really great and feel like places these characters would be, especially when they mix and match character locations like Lee and Marie Kanker being in the trailer park they live in near the cul-de-sac, while their sister May Kanker is at Camp Kidney trying to commit a magical sex crime on Big Ed, who is hiding from her at Mount Blackhead. I love the interactions between all of the characters and their placements on the map, except when they moved farther out of the cul-de-sac to Peach Creek Commons. That made Ben's guide missions way longer than they needed to be. I could go on and on about these characters for hours, and I know this is a big ask, but I'd rather have people experience this world and its characters for themselves. This game was made in part by people who clearly love the Cartoon Network characters that they wrote for in the shows they came from. I mean, Magus XLR and eventually even Symbiotic Titan got love in this game. Those were not corporate decisions, they didn't sell toys. I just want to talk about this game forever, to like anyone willing to listen. Since we're talking about shit everyone else has talked about, we might as well get into the drama. I'ma keep this short and sweet because the topic is not. FusionFall's last official year of activity was 2013. Before its closing, FusionFall had a tumultuous run of its last couple of years. Being an easy-to-exploit browser game, hackers did what they do and started hacking. This was always an issue, actually, because the lack of anti-cheat for this game was immediately problematic. Not only that, but being a kids game, I'm certain there were a few unsavory types trying to get a cupcake, like James Charles, Hashinshin, a concerning amount of the Minecraft community, Even with that being said, Cartoon Network didn't pull the plug on any freedoms like open chat or mail for a while. During that while, players continued to enjoy FusionFall for all it was worth, and on April 19th, 2010, it became worth nothing. And by that I mean it became free to play. This was actually cool because despite a lot of us having memories of the original paid FusionFall, many kids never got their parents to pay the sub fee, so you'll find that most of the fan base for this game are people who played starting after 2010, and by extension 2011 when the Academy update released. FusionFall was free for a surprisingly long amount of time without Greeground around to update the game. There wasn't enough content to keep people's subs running. Most of the community that stayed did so because they made friends in-game and wanted to keep talking and having fun with those friends. I stayed for a while. I think I only quit the game shortly after it did go free to play, or maybe before it went free to play. It was a long time ago. I gave my Cannonbolt armor set to one of my friends and vanished. I was glitched into the future when I did that, and he just happened to be leveling a new character and noticed me, but after that I left. 2010 to 2013 is a pretty long run for an MMO likely making no money, but with that being said, we come to FusionFall's unfortunate closing. In late June of 2013, the FusionFall team disabled chat, leaving the only way to communicate being in-game emails and emotes. The reason being people easily working around the Coco profanity filter that no one on the team ever thought to add to. Funny enough, this is also the reason the FusionFall team would eventually take away the ability to type custom names at character creation. People just kept making inappropriate names that the team did not feel like manually reviewing. The bad news just kept coming as 2 months later it was announced that FusionFall would be closing on August 29th, 2013. But not without a farewell event starting on the 23rd until the server's closing, with free loot and access to every Nano for players at all levels. Thinking about this makes me sad. I wasn't playing FusionFall at the time and didn't even notice it closed till a year later when I had the sudden urge to see my old character and visit Forgotten Falls. Instead, I was met with FusionFall Heroes, which was an instant fuck this from me and a fuck you from Cartoon Network. I'm not talking about FusionFall Heroes. In 2018, a certain FusionFall revival project became publicly available, allowing any and everyone to relive their childhoods and experience the game as it was. This was important to many people. A version of FusionFall was hosted online as it was before Academy, so the better version, and it was the only place that you could play FusionFall. Depending on your point of view, this was a good or bad thing. The positive to this being that the entire FusionFall community was playing in a single server, sharing the experience of playing through the MMO together, as typically MMOs are played. The negative aspect of this is technically one group of developers had a monopoly on the entirety of FusionFall, including its player base. On April 16th, 2020, the FusionFall Retro project was closed due to a cease and desist request from Cartoon Network. There are more than a few interpretations of why this happened, and honestly, I just don't want to. My personal favorite interpretation is of the villain doing a bad thing for a good reason. There may have been a guy who reported the Retro team to Cartoon Network for harboring EDPs in both the Discord and FusionFall servers. It is often said that he was throwing a tantrum about the team not adding in features or cosmetics he wanted into FusionFall, and instead were being lazy or just having lives outside of the child's game that they offered up their time and money for with literally no pay and without accepting any donations. There's another side to this story that states what he really wanted was for the Retro team to release the source code for FusionFall so that anyone could host their own servers to play on privately. But they refused, so he lied to Cartoon Network, getting Retro shut down to force them into making the FusionFall code open source. There's also another less vengeful story that Cartoon Network just wanted the search result cleared up so that people who typed in Retro didn't find this old MMO they weren't profiting profiting off of anymore. I don't really care how it happened, I'm just happy that I, and anyone who cares, can play FusionFall whenever we want, because not long after, on August 18th, 2020, Open Fusion released, and the day was saved. Do you know how many people have said the exact same shit that I just spent the last few minutes talking about? All of them. I want to talk about the game again. There are just a few more things I want to talk about before getting to the endgame, the first of these things being music. Seth Podowitz, FusionFall's composer, snapped the fuck off. Many tracks from this game lived in my head rent-free well into adulthood before word of FusionFall's revival ever reached me. I likely have not been playing exclusively music from the game throughout the entire video, but it all just fits. The songs are catchy and memorable, but most importantly, quite a few of them carry meaning that I simply cannot grasp because I'm not hyper-focused enough with old cartoons, but another creator, Tad I guess, certainly is. And briefly pointed out that the remix of the Powerpuff Girls theme song in FusionFall blots out Buttercup's portion because in narrative, she went missing after a battle with Mojo Jojo shortly before Fuse's invasion. I'm not gonna bite everything Tad said here, go watch his video, it's great and one of the few FusionFall essays on YouTube obviously filled with love for the game and cartoons in general. It's a lot shorter than this one and much easier to consume. If you like FusionFall, you've probably already seen it. My favorite song in FusionFall is the Galaxy Gardens theme. This hit me like one of those drinks that creep up on you half an hour after only taking one shot. I had been blasting 100 gex during my first playthrough and wasn't really listening to the music until this track lulled me in. I was shocked that this was just chilling in a 2008 Cartoon Network game. While we're talking about sound design, a lot of fusion monsters have unique defeat sounds. I don't have much to say about this, I just think it's cool how much effort went into not only designing the looks for these monsters, but the overall vibe they give off as well. None of the fusion monsters feel like filler designs. One of my favorites is the Vile Cabinet, and apparently someone at Cartoon Network felt the same, seeing that they were featured in a commercial. Is that Anthony Padilla? Looking back into gameplay, monsters from different areas will often look the exact same, but have slightly different names. This is because FusionFall's kill missions rely on beating monsters with specific names, and not monsters in specific areas. This way, you won't be credited for mission kills on monsters that you'd normally need to be inside of a fusion layer for, or somewhere else on the map. However, there are instances in which the devs left random amounts of monsters with the exact same names as monsters in different parts of the map. These Cyclomanders are involved in a few quests around Charles Darwin, some of which will want you to target Cyclomanders inside of the infected zone, but you can more easily kill the Cyclomanders right next to the monkey, saving you lots of time. A much bigger time save has to do with these unicycles. The mission wants you to go all the way down to Townsville Center to fight them after receiving it from Bubbles, who is located at City Hall. However, there are also unicycles directly beside City Hall, which you might have knowledge of from questing in the area beforehand. There aren't that many instances of this in-game, but the few that are save quite a bit of time and I appreciate it. So here we are, I have spoken in detail about every gameplay mechanic and feature I can think of in an attempt to give you, at the bare minimum, a decent understanding of what it's like to play FusionFall. But I initially wanted this video to be structured in a way akin to a walkthrough where I'd show off gameplay and talk about my experiences step by step throughout each level, intermittently talking about those other subjects I hyper-obsessed over, like movement. After a few weeks and a couple of rewrites, I realized that this video was already way too fucking long, and I don't genuinely think most of this game is very interesting to watch because a lot of its charm comes from personal experience. But I decided to amend that approach toward the endgame because this is where the bulk of FusionFall's playtime comes from, and I need to vent. Now, I classify portions of the game as early being levels 1 through 12, mid being 12 through 22, and late game being 22 through 36. Now, you might be thinking, late game sounds like half the game. What are you talking about? And you'd be wrong under the worst circumstances. It's far more than half of the game, and in the best of runs, it's about a third. This large discrepancy comes solely from the not so easily avoidable padding meant to keep your sub running. This was never removed, even after the Cartoon Network team took over in 2011. Now, what is this roadblock I've been talking about? It's level 21, which only unlocks 10 world missions. This isn't really an issue at any other point of the game. Some of the 30s have less missions per level, but compensate with high fusion matter rewards. The problem with the level 21 missions is that they just don't give enough fusion matter to level you up, not even close. If you haven't been doing guide missions from at least 3 guides to this point, you're going to have a bad time, and if you haven't been using a scavenge nano during mission turn-ins, you might as well just make a new character. I spoke at length about the scavenge power early on in the video, in case I ended up encouraging others to play the game while listening to me ramble. Now, I don't want to tell you how to have fun. Enjoy the game however you like and complete whatever guide you want in whichever order you want, but my way is the most efficient for people who have jobs. It's time for my brute force guide on getting past level 21 and completing FusionFall in a reasonable amount of time without experience grinding like you don't have enough party members leveled up to take on the final boss in a JRPG. The guides are Bin, Dexter, Double D, and Mojo Jojo. You only need to complete a single guide's full quest line through 35. 36 doesn't matter because you won't need fusion matter anymore. The guide you'll be completing is Dexter because his final quest giver, Samurai Jack, is located in the Darklands, which is the area all of your late game missions will be taking place in. He starts giving you missions at level 24, meaning you'll be very close to quest areas in comparison to literally every other guide, making you take sometimes 3 or 4 monkey rides just to reach the NPCs alone. You'll need to get 2 other guides up to level 25. This is the bare minimum that you'll have to do in order to avoid doing a really long hidden quest line that spans the entire game. The 2 guides you'll be using are Double D and Bin. As much as it pains me to say, avoid Mojo Jojo's missions like the plague. Even if you have no intention of finishing his missions, 9 of them use Father as his guide NPC, who is frustratingly located 2 minutes outside of the cul-de-sac, which was his original location and the closest teleport. Picking this guide as a secondary on my first playthrough made me take a 2-week break from the game because the 2-minute walk combined with the fact that I was doing low-level catch-up missions melted my brain and killed my motivation. Mojo's late-game missions are by far the worst as well because his NPC ends up being Mandy, who is located at Devil's Bluff, which I shit you not is at least 2 monkeys and 1 scamper ride away from every one of her mission zones at minimum. Bin ends up just as terrible because his missions use Haas Delgado, who was also located at Devil's Bluff. Anyway, as you level, just make sure to keep Dexter's mission going while supplementing them with Double D and Bin's at your convenience. You'll need to have both of them at least at level 15 to get past level 21, and if you haven't been doing so, the catch-up is awful. Remember to gumball every single mission turn-in past level 14 alongside doing every mission you unlock past level 14, or you will be in for a bad time. A handful of missions can be hard to find because they're out of the way or straight up hidden, like Ancient Greenberg being in an area no mission will ever naturally lead you. I have a fond memory of one of my friends at the time telling me that the FusionFall wiki has a mission list and that I could cross-reference it with missions I've completed to find the ones I missed. This is the set of missions that finally tipped me over 21 as a kid, and it's one of my favorite memories. That's to say, you'll learn the value of keeping the wiki open while playing. That mission list will become your most valuable tool while traversing the late game. I and many others have played this game more than once, so we're already familiar enough with where everything is to navigate the game in a reasonable amount of time. I imagine that most people watching this video are just fans of the game already, but if somehow I've encouraged you to play FusionFall yourself, you will get lost and it will happen often. The smallest things, as accidentally taking a monkey ride to Tech Square thinking it was City Station, will ruin the next 4 minutes of your life, and that never gets any easier. But the wiki will help you maintain your sanity throughout the entire experience. If you don't want to ruin your immersion, I think you can hold off on using it till level 21, but if you're just replaying the game for some challenge or just to do it, I highly recommend having it open starting at level 14. Now that we've gotten past 21, the endgame really begins. Level 22 is probably the most fun FusionFall gets. I remember saying something similar to that while streaming the game to my friends on Discord the second time. Dexter and Mandark will bounce around mission unlocks and have you doing things specifically in Tech Square and nearby areas, meaning you won't have to take any monkeys or teleport in order to complete these missions. This is the most seamless line of missions in the entire game, and in my opinion, the most visually pleasing area of the game to look at. From the cool vibes of Tech Square to the grimy Steam Alley to the fusion invasion of Galaxy Gardens, you really get to see the contrast of all things tech here. Tech Square is the peak of progress, where all of the bright and shiny inventions are, along with Computress, who spends most of her time breaking up conflicts between three arrogant geniuses. Steam Alley has the heavy industrial grime that's usually hidden and out of sight, but ultimately leads to the outward beauty of commonplace technology. And then there's Galaxy Gardens, a nature reserve making sure that at least a tiny bit of green remains amongst the flashy buildings and machines downtown is littered with. Level 22 is an absolute treat and gives more than enough fusion matter to level up without any guide missions. Level 23 is almost just as fun, but starts showing slight signs of abusive behavior. The Spaceport Infected Zone missions are some of the most fun in the entire game, because it fully utilizes FusionFall's verticality. Routing your way through this place is the best platforming gets in FusionFall, and the enemies here aren't pushovers either. They're placed in really uncomfortable spots, forcing you to pick and choose your battles while avoiding floors of damaging fusion matter, which I have not mentioned once in this entire video somehow. The spaceport also has thuggards. Thugger sounds like a slur. Around this time, the game will try transitioning you to nowhere and even lead you to unlocking the Darklands scamper. The first mission that takes you there is at level 22, but you don't have to worry about fighting anything. The mid-20s gets a lot of usage out of nowhere, which was shown a lot of love. Not part of its vast emptiness goes unused, as strange as that sounds. The Infected Zone is probably the one you'll visit most outside of damn dirty Monkey Mountain. Plenty of missions will have you fighting monsters in the middle of nowhere, and the Catacombs are a nice twist on what players think a teleport will lead them to. Usually in FusionFall, whenever you're warped somewhere, it's an infected zone or fusion layer, restricting your vehicle access. But the Catacombs is an area instanced separately from the main overworld, much like the Darklands, which we'll get to. Even though I have a problem with the map's lack of function in the Catacombs, I can't deny its charm and its perfect functioning as a maze meant to confuse and frustrate you, inciting players to ask others for help along the way. I hate monkeys. Monkey Foothills is the single worst part of FusionFall, and it's not even close. From levels 26 through 29, you'll be frequenting this section of the map, which encompasses the worst FusionFall has to offer. Many of the missions in this area make you leave and talk to NPCs literally everywhere else: the Darklands, Mount Blackhead, and downtown. The back and forth itself wouldn't be so bad if this was a hub area with a scamper, but it isn't. Both ways you'll usually end up commuting to Monkey Foothills are fucking journeys. The first is from Mount Blackhead, requiring 2 monkey rides. At no point is riding a vehicle faster because of the platforming section in Forgotten Falls and the foothills. If you're coming from the Darklands, it's a straight up walk, probably about 2 or 3 minutes depending on how lost you get along the way. If that weren't bad enough, remember, most mission turn-ins require a return trip to the mission giver, so you'll be likely taking 4 monkeys just for 1 mission. The worst are the missions from Mojo's Volcano, making it a whopping 6 monkey rides for what is usually 1 fucking mission at a time. They're story related and have to be done in order. We're just getting started. I could forgive all the back and forth if the infected zone these missions took place in wasn't the literal worst platforming section in the entire game. To this point, I have praised FusionFall's use of platforming. It adds an element of challenge to an otherwise kind of bland MMO with a few interesting combat mechanics. But what I haven't talked about to this point is all the waiting. This happens everywhere in FusionFall, not just Monkey Mountain, but usually not to such an extreme extent. Oftentimes, you'll be waiting for a platform to move back into place in order to reach the next platform or a mission marker. The downtime spent just waiting for that to happen is the genuine worst part of FusionFall, but usually those wait times can be mitigated with a jump and/or rocket nano. Most times you can completely ignore the platform timers and practically fly whenever you want so long as you have the nano potions to keep their stamina up. But Monkey Mountain is fucking tragic. It's big and looks the same all around, so not only is it confusing, but almost all the platforms move in a painfully slow pattern, making you wait minutes at a time before being able to reach a single mission objective, nearly all of which are located on said floating platforms. You can climb all the way up the volcano with just a rocket nano, made easier when including a jump nano, but this place is so frustratingly confusing, I can almost never find the exact pixels I need to jump on to gain elevation. I fucking hate this place. I have a feeling someone was really proud of this infected zone because of just how many missions take place here, likely thinking this was the pinnacle of vertical design in the entire game when really, this is as low as it gets. Just thinking about Monkey Mountain made me tired. After reaching level 30, you'll almost exclusively be questing in the Darklands, which is the area most affected by Fuse's influence. Forsaken Valley and Dinosaur Pass are still bright and colorful just on the edge of what is the main overworld. The fire swamps and fire pits aren't really messed up by Fuse's monsters, more so a naturally harsh environment because of all the lava and fire. Hunter's Crest is where things get interesting. Fusion monsters are much more tightly packed here, and the combat becomes an unavoidable constant. Side note, my friends and I moved our hangout spot from the plain at Mount Blackhead to this little secluded area behind the fort walls because it was easier to read chat without all the other conversations taking up space. The Dark Glade is something special. This is the hardest and most tedious curveball that FusionFall throws at you, and players either love or hate it. I myself am sitting firmly in the love department. This is the largest infected zone in FusionFall, being its own section of the map, unlike every other infected zone, which is a small part of the overall theme of a map section. Being big isn't its only gimmick. Also, being an infected zone, you cannot use vehicles while traversing it, meaning this is the only infected zone in the game requiring you to consider taking mobility nanos rather than just combat-oriented ones if you haven't already been doing that. For me, I had to use a run nano here. It's just too big not to. Thankfully, there's a nano machine besides the mission givers inside of the Dark Glade, meaning you can switch back to a scavenge nano every time you have a turn in. It's a bit annoying losing your gumball boost each time you switch, but pick and choose. The first time I saw these air bubbles as a kid, I was astonished, and then immediately agitated as I fell out of a horizontally moving one due to bad detection. You get used to how these work pretty quickly. They are finicky, but always have a rocket nano here to fix your positioning when you fall. Here's a functioning bridge. You can walk around and use these to get to the center of the tree, but the amount of time it takes to do that isn't really worth it for the few missions that make you come here. I haven't spoken about this yet, but in most infected zones it takes an awkward amount of time to get back to the start or reach the end of one so you can leave. Most missions just have you go somewhere in the middle of an infected zone, then return to the quest giver. I usually just use the warp away button, which sends you to the closest respawn point, always being beside a warp gate while inside of an infected zone. Dark Glade, on the other hand, is so large it has multiple respawn points, so you don't have to start from the beginning if you ever die. This was a problem for me, and only on my first playthrough. I just thugged it out and walked back each time, but on my second playthrough, I came to a realization. Whenever you get disconnected from the game for any reason, be it a crash or internet connection, when you log back into the game, you'll be placed outside of the infected zone at the warp gate. One day, I got tired of that long-ass walk and just closed the game, but I immediately reopened the game because I realized I would be placed right outside of the infected zone. This is the single biggest time save that you can consistently use in the entire game. You don't even have to close the game, you can just go to the character select menu and log back in seconds later. This can be done in every infected zone. Notably, the Catacombs are not one, so you're out of luck if you get truly lost in there. Figuring this out almost made me want to play the game again just to see how much time this saves. I'm not going to right now, but still. Next up is Heroes Hollow, Green Maw, and the Precipice. These are all kind of the same area, but because of how the map sectors are separated, not really. Missions here are mostly you traversing these areas and going on kill missions. Green Maw is the last infected zone, and honestly, if you had to platform all the way up to Dexter's ship more than once, I'd probably hate this place as much as Monkey Mountain, but it's used sparingly. I'll give it a pass. I only came here twice in both of my playthroughs, but I'm sure some of the guide missions get more uses out of this place. These three sections of the map are the final test before facing Fuse and his Gauntlet. There isn't really any platforming, but a whole lot of combat. Enemies are everywhere, and you'll be straight up fighting here more than any other portion of the game, which sort of makes this the least interesting bit of FusionFall, but the tone of this place compensates for that greatly. Enemies will use eruption and drain attacks far more often than at any other point, or this place is just so combat dense it feels that way. Fusion matter is everywhere, and not the kind that levels you up. Just walking around will damage you in a lot of places. Most people won't switch to a Freedom Nano to prevent that because the Freedom power is otherwise worthless. There aren't any man-made platforms left. Everything has been destroyed in a battle long lost. There are barely any people left here either, just albedo, some plumbers, and cheese. Oh yeah, the commute here is a long 2.5-minute monkey ride, or a 2-minute ride and a walk. Leveling here isn't an issue as long as you've kept up with the guide missions. I actually think the last 5 levels come faster than most, not only because of how much fusion matter you get on turn-ins, but because you won't have to do a lot of traveling back to the main world. There is one mission set that the Echo Echoes give you that'll pretty much take you on a tour of the areas you visited throughout the entire game, which does feel a little nostalgic after spending all that time at damn dirty Monkey Mountain. Demongo's missions are all short and sweet and will level you up once if you happen to do all of them at the same time. While I had a fairly pleasant time in the Darklands, I'm sure many players hated this place because they didn't know to use scavenge nanos, or they didn't realize they would need to work on multiple guides. This is the last stretch of game before fighting Fuse and taking back the Darklands, and to prepare for that, let's go on one last side quest. There's a lot I wanted to talk about in this video that I wasn't sure about how to fit, and then around the 10,000 word mark I thought, does it even matter anymore? A creator by the name of Pikmin Wolf made a FusionFall tier list 2 years ago with a friend where they placed every area from the game on a tier list over the course of an hour and a half for the fun of it. But they also shared insights on what it was like playing through those areas. This video is what gave me the push I needed to commit to this project that I've been thinking about for the past 3 years. That video is now unlisted, and I don't know if I should actually share it, so maybe ask him or something. But if you like FusionFall, you will probably get a kick out of it. With that being said, I'm not going to tier every area in FusionFall. I'm gonna tier every infected zone. I largely ignored the infected zones till this point because I didn't want to spoil my thoughts on them before we got to the tier list, but now that we've been introduced to every major area of the game and seen what FusionFall has to offer, this feels like an appropriate time. 5 of the infected zones are duplicates because of them still existing in the future. They aren't different enough outside of a few missing platforms, and the green fusion matter being everywhere. I won't rank the duplicates, but I will be ranking all other infected zones in the order you reach them. Pokey Oats Junior High is a great introduction to infected zones. Not only does it get players used to platforming, but it doesn't have you waiting around in many places either. A colorful location that's also pretty fun overall. Great job. Mandark's house looks cool. It's Ingenious Grove, which is a first look at the high-tech style used in most of downtown. The Infected Zone is also a proper introduction to moving platforms. Basically, this one teaches you to wait around. I don't like it. Finally reaching the top of Mandark's house is really fun, and gauging the distance of jumps you can make never really gets old, but the slow-moving platforms at the beginning outweigh the fun I had. Mandark's house is frustrating. Sweet Revenge. Most of the challenge regarding this infected zone is just reaching it because there are a lot of monsters outside. But on the inside, it's empty. I like the NPCs here. The Candy Pirates have fun quest lines and enjoyable interactions. The ship itself is quite fun to jump around and explore. If you're experimenting with nano powers around this time, this zone will really help you learn that movement-related powers speed up platforming tremendously. With even just one run, jump, or rocket nano here, you can skip most of the waiting. I really like Sweet Revenge, great job. I always forget Delightful Developments even exists. I didn't even know its name until just now. This is the first infected zone that forces combat onto players. The platforming is light here. Falling off of things isn't a big slowdown because the buildings aren't too high, and have a lot of openings. You can use the incomplete houses and construction to skip most of the hazards along the way. Even though this one escapes me most of the time, I think that's due to how sparingly this one is used outside of Mojo Jojo's guide missions, which I avoid. Delightful Developments is good fun. Mega's Last Stand is the first infected zone that shows off what the game is all about. Lots of combat with monsters that will aggro you from Wakanda and heavy on platforming in multiple areas, really making you consider the pros and cons of movement nanos over combat related ones. Even though there is a bit of waiting around for moving platforms here, most of, if not all of them, can be skipped with the right nano powers. Mega's Last Stand is peak FusionFall. The Boneyard sucks. It's the first infected zone that requires the use of a cannon, and you can't tell how far this thing will send you till you launch yourself. Granted, only like 2 missions need you to reach the floating isle. I still hate this place. It gets a lot of mileage though, and I'll give it bonus points for being directly beside a monkey, even though I hate them too. The Boneyard is frustrating. Reactor Works and Endsville in general is the first major difficulty spike of FusionFall. This place is meant to get you used to aggro ranges, and you will become familiar by the time you leave. The infected zone itself is really big, it's used a lot. I skip a lot of missions around here because most of them center around this portion that makes you wait for like more than half a minute on exactly one moving platform. If any infected zone will get you to see the value in jump and rocket nanos, it's this one. At least you can make a lot of shortcuts here with the jump or rocket nanos. I would have placed this at frustrating because it is genuinely frustrating at times, but because of the way it conditions players to switch up nanos, I'll say it's good fun. You might notice there's little in between of what's fun and bad on this list. That's because these infected zones truly are either fun or really offensively bad. Charles Darwin is alright. Another test of patience, goading you into movement nanos. Not too much going on here. When you leave this fusion layer, you will be attacked by a Cyclomander, unless you're a crazy speedrunner that finished the mission before it respawns. Charles Darwin is alright. Dizzy World is awesome. It's a rundown amusement park infested by fusion monsters, which are avoidable by jumping across the tents and boost pads. There's also just a lot of fun stuff going on here. There's this slide that, to my knowledge, isn't used during any missions. Ghost Freak, whatever this is, and a lot of fun platforming. I'm sure you racing fans are upset with me for not talking about them, but I simply cannot force myself to do time trials in any game. There are apparently race rewards, which I only found out about after looking up Dizzy World's wiki page. Peak FusionFall. I really like the Sunny Bridges Auditorium. It's used in my favorite area of the game, being Orchid Bay, and its surrounding sectors. A lot of fun platforming and shortcuts to be made with only a single mission that forces you to use a cannon. Great job. The jungle training area is used in all of 2 missions. I guess the devs thought it was too close to Mount Blackhead, meaning it doesn't add enough padding to the game. This place is kinda boring anyway, but not offensively so it's alright. I don't even remember Loch Ness. I think this one was just too far from anything to be used more than 3 times, so it'll go into... Huh? The fissure is weird. There aren't a lot of missions that take place inside of it, but there are tons of missions that happen around it, acting as a large obstacle between mission givers and mission objectives. I won't fault it for that though, because the missions that do use it are kinda fun. The fissure is a real test of your platforming skills. I usually hate timed missions, but even as a kid, I was too stubborn to give up here. No enemies, just a really aggressive set of moving platforms and obstacles, likely due to the themes of Ghost running amok in this place. Great job. Cuts and Bruises is a beat-up skate park, and although you can't actually skate here, it's a really interactive zone. The moving platforms aren't too slow, and the overall vibe of this place is upbeat and fun. The monsters hurt at the appropriate level and never seem to lose aggro. The Cuts and Bruises skate park was a great job. I'm in a love-hate relationship with the Sandcastle infected zone. The platforms leading to its fun area are really slow, but aside from that, this place is great. The transparent slides are used in most of the missions here. Getting here is a bit challenging with all the clustered monster groups, but if you're coming straight from Orchid Bay, you can ride along the water to avoid everything. Sandcastle gets a good fun from me. Crystalline Caverns doesn't have a lot going on. Sure, it's nice looking, and being an insanely vertical zone makes it stand out from others, but nothing really happens here. It's alright. The construction site is really fucking cool. Yeah, it starts off a little slow, and the enemies will never lose aggro of you no matter how far you get away, but damn is it fun. If no challenge before convinced you, this place tells you outright to use movement nanos. There's a certain obstacle here that you just can't get around without a jump or rocket nano. Sure, you can get where you need to be eventually, but this is the game telling you to use everything at your disposal in order to save time, and create fun shortcuts. Mandark's nano mission starts here because he's trying to dock someone who is beating him in an online game. The culprit ends up being Fusion Mandark, but what if it was a normal dude? Was Mandark gonna swat someone? Was the player character going to be complicit in swatting? Peak FusionFall. Hanna-Barbera Temple is a tribute to the Hanna-Barbera cartoons that simply couldn't be put in FusionFall, but help cement Cartoon Network's dominance. As cool as it looks, I don't like this place. Too much waiting, too many forced fights, and way too many totem missions make you come here just to make you do it all over again in the exact same way. There's also no way back to the beginning of the zone, but you could just use the relock trick to leave this place quicker. Hanna-Barbera Temple is frustrating. Tyrannical Gardens is one of my all-time favorites. It looks pretty, the platforming is paced perfectly to be augmented with nano usage, and the music is great. This place also gets a lot of mileage. Reaching it means either walking around a lot or getting with the program and using a rocket nano, which you will actually unlock a second one here in case you didn't give Professor Utonium the rocket power. Dexter was a mainstay of my first playthrough after reaching this place. Tyrannical Gardens is peak FusionFall. Skypad Spaceport is probably the best infected zone in the entire game. You've probably seen me use a lot of footage of it during this video because it perfectly exemplifies the best qualities of FusionFall. Functional architecture with railways and zip lines, platforming that openly encourages player freedom and pathfinding, along with a nice spread of fusion monsters sprinkled around the bottom. This place is punishing. I never fell off a platform or missed a jump here during either of my playthroughs, but if you do, not only will you have to deal with the monsters below, but you'll have to find your way back up, and I don't think that's a bad thing. This is a late game area that perfectly tests you on every skill you've gained while playing. From combat to platforming, Skypad Spaceport really deserves a tier of its own. Nowhere Triangle is used in a lot of missions. I think this part of the game in general is really fun. There are slow-moving platforms in this infected zone, but by this time you should be used to rocketing and skipping around all the tedium. This zone takes advantage of the weird slopes and angles players can walk up. Peak FusionFall. I just got whiplash because the canopy is awful. Almost every mission here requires usage of the cannons, meaning a lot of missing, falling, and trying again. There was even one time a mission here filled me with an undeserved amount of stress. The canopy is extremely frustrating, but I won't make a new tier just for it. Probably. Monkey Mountain is catastrophically bad. Dinosaur Graveyard is pretty fun. Unless you fall, you're not going to be fighting anything. This is a punishment for failing at platforming. With the spinning platforms forcing you to think and move quickly, this is one of the more fun skill checks in the game. It isn't hard, but really cool, and I wish there were a few more zones like it. There's no waiting around for things to come your way, just put your foot on the gas and go. Peak FusionFall. Inferno Fields sucks. A lot of monsters and not very vertical. Outside of a few really tedious missions, you'll be on the ground for most visits here. It looks kind of cool with all of the lava, but I'll just say it's alright. The Dark Tree Clearing Infected Zone doubles as the entirety of Dark Glade. I like this one a lot. I talked about it at length already, but I can understand why a lot of people just don't fuck with this place, so I'll say it does a great job. Green Gullet is just frustrating. It's the last infected zone, and you're only forced to come here twice, but man does this place suck. Too much waiting on platforms, and not enough freedom to utilize nano powers to create shortcuts. If this place were used as often as Monkey Mountain, it would also be catastrophically bad, but because we were spared that fate, it is just frustrating. And that's every infected zone tiered in the order you reach them. I think me from a year ago left out like 1 or 2, but I can't remember, so I'll probably fix it in post or something. We might as well talk about a few less important things that I neglected so far since we're getting so close to the end. Inventory space is brutally limited. FusionFall encourages players to collect all the gear and accessories, but the amount of inventory and bank space just doesn't reflect that. At some point, the FusionFall team increased the amount of bank space we had, but it wasn't nearly enough. To put it into perspective, each guide mission gives you a piece of untradeable gear that can never be found again through other means if you happen to delete or sell the items to a vendor. There are 144 of these items in total, with only 200 slots per bank. This wasn't fucking enough. Eventually, they'd add local banks. This solved the issue by adding 4 more banks and increased the Taro grind because they aren't free to use like the normal banks. There's a player email system. Your guides also email you every time you log in or level up, informing you about your next available guide mission. Both players and guide mails use the same alert sound. Because of this, you're likely not to notice if another player ever emails you. I was happily surprised that another player actually did email me during my second playthrough, allowing me to show off this feature. You can send and receive items and taros using player mail instead of having to be right beside them for a trade. This player, Sativa Smith, was the only person I had extended interaction with throughout both playthroughs. We chatted for a bit, then they got disconnected when we first met, and emailed me so we could finish our conversation when they got back online. They randomly gave me these wings, which were popular ultra-rare items back in the day, but after seeing literally every high-level player walk around with these, it gets old, so I prefer this little guy. If you're watching Sativa, I really appreciate your help in showing off player interaction in a game less active than Joe Biden. There are actually quite a few people playing FusionFall at all times of day, but because there are so many different servers to play on, everyone's spread out, meaning your run-ins with other people will be few and far between unless you happen to be moving at the exact same pace as another player. Speaking of which, due to FusionFall obsessively sending you back and forth to every section of the map, you'll come across every level of player no matter where you are, which is pretty cool. You will always have reasons to visit areas you've outleveled, at least until you complete everything. Welp, that's it. No more yapping. The final side quest is over. We're geared up and ready to take on Lord Fuse. The Fuse No More questline is the last few missions of FusionFall, leading you to what is its own section of the Darklands map. Fuse's lair. These missions will lead you first into Fuse's labyrinth, then into his throne. I like the normal Fusion layers, but these are the only layers that feel like traditional MMO dungeons. This is the culmination of everything you've done to this point. These dungeons are filled with combat, zipline puzzles, and platforming, the consequences to failing any being a trip back to the start. The enemies here are trigger happy with drain attacks, so much so that you'll likely chain together counters here more frequently than anywhere else. This is where FusionFall throws all of its mechanics at you and expects you to be familiar. And at long last, we're here. Jack is too tired from his battle with the Doomstriders to help. The time is now, the hero is you, and up to 3 friends if you have any. Lord Fuse waits below the game's final zipline, and I'm not gonna lie, this fight is pretty good. Fuse has basic attacks that'll hit you throughout the entire battle, forcing you to heal even if you have successfully avoided all his other attacks. Drain and Eruption. That's right, he has every tool at his disposal that his minions possess, but on crack. Fuse has a massive eruption attack that takes up half the stage. The only ways to avoid this are to get high enough above the hitbox that it can't touch you, or by using a run nano to move out of its large AoE. Not only that, but he often chains drain attacks, making you focus on color matching while also trying not to get hit by eruptions. And even when you fully deplete his health bar, you're met with a second phase when he splits into 3 targets, both of his arms and his main body. I died a lot during these attempts. I'm pretty sure it's possible to win this fight solo without dying, but I didn't have the patience to redo this, so I kept throwing myself at him till every portion of him was dead. While you remain in the instance, missing portions of him don't return, and the fight never fully resets. This is both a blessing and a curse, as if you happen to leave all 3 parts of him alive before dying, all 3 will aggro you the second you return to the arena, likely out-damaging you with ease. This is a true raid boss. It has decently interesting mechanics for what is supposed to be an easy game. It makes me wish FusionFall had a shot at being a full-featured MMO with raids, challenging mechanics, and the whole 9 yards. There's actually so much potential here, considering platforming is a major part of the game. Even dungeon phases of in-game raids could be made interesting through encouraging players to use group nano powers to limit how many people need utility and how many people need damage like drain. And I'm certain there were plans for expansions and post-game content at some point, considering the existence of group abilities, but we never got to see any of it, which is a real shame. Cartoon Network, if anyone happens to be listening, I'd love an opportunity to help officially revive this game and work towards its full potential as a profitable MMO and franchise. I mean, just look at it. The story alone has infinite roads to go down. There could have even been an animated series airing on Toonami, following the story of time travelers sent on a round trip to the past in order to save the world. Fuse could have started taking over real characters instead of just mimicking them. I'm foaming at the mouth here. Something needs to be done with FusionFall, but this isn't a fanfic channel. I am just a little sad to be finished with the game. After defeating Fuse, all that's left to do is take one last monkey ride back to Jack and complete your mission. Doing this will forever lock you out of the final dungeon and the Lord Fuse fight. There is no post-game. This is it. When I was a child, I never wanted FusionFall to end, so I never turned in this mission. I knew that the second I completed the final mission, there was nothing left to do. Nothing left to work towards. Yeah, I could grind out the highest level gear, or find all the ultra rare items, or race. Those things aren't what kept me going. The idea of a never-ending adventure kept driving me to log in. Talking to all the Cartoon Network characters I grew up watching, seeing all of the fun interactions they had, not only with me, but each other, across however many shows you can think of. The challenging jumps, the colorful and welcoming world that I felt truly a part of, eventually ended. And this time, as an adult, I was ready to let it end.
Any last words?
No matter what anyone tells you,
I hate those monkeys.
If you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed mention of the fact that I played FusionFall twice for this video. I lost a lot of footage from my first playthrough and almost gave up on this video entirely, but during that first playthrough, my friend Ember, who watched me play a lot of this game, noticed that whenever she looked back at the stream, I'd usually be on a monkey ride, and she said something that I only took as a joke until 3 months later. What if you played the game again and recorded every monkey ride to see how much time you spend not playing the game? I didn't really consider this an option at first, but the longer I thought about it, I came to realize this would solve a couple of problems for me. First, I wouldn't have to worry about my lost footage anymore because I'd be playing the game again, and second, I could put a tangible number on how much time those damn dirty money-hungry monkeys took away from me. I played FusionFall again, but this time I used 2 instances of OBS, one for gameplay, and one which would funnel every single monkey ride into a folder that only has footage of monkey rides. Now, to understand why the Skyway Agent rides get so annoying, it is because they are sections of playtime that you cannot play the game. They are a method of transport that should be fast travel, but instead usually eats 2 minutes of your time per ride. While recording these rides, I sat at my computer, manually starting and stopping recordings, specifically when clicking the Go Now button, and ending each recording when my character's feet touch the ground. You can actually move shortly before the flight animation ends, but I'm already being generous enough by cutting out all of the menuing required to start a ride in the first place. I have in my possession 406 recordings of Skyway Agent rides, which I will round up to 410 because more than a few of those recordings I chained together. All of these rides came out to 9 hours and 6 seconds of footage. For 9 hours, I sat at my computer, doing literally nothing but waiting for these stupid fucking rides to end. The worst part of this is the fact that this run of the game was really well optimized. I played essentially as fast as possible. Yeah, I didn't do any racing, but normal people don't. The average FusionFall experience is playing through each mission and trying to navigate the world without getting too lost. That being said, I'm extremely familiar with FusionFall. I know my way around the entire game, and unlike a new or returning player, I don't constantly have to cross-reference with the map to tell where I'm going. On top of that, you're likely to misclick and take a ride to the wrong place often on a first playthrough of FusionFall, alongside the fact that most players won't have the mission list up at all times, telling them exactly what missions to do when they unlock them. I'm guessing the average time spent on monkey rides is more like 16 hours per playthrough. Again, I was pretty generous with how I timestamped this. I cut out all of the menuing and only included the rides themselves basically. For most of that compilation, I got lazy and started recording later than usual. I'm never rendering this, by the way. Also, the server I played on did not alter the monkey routes in any way. Some servers do to save time. So yeah, fuck those monkeys. I doubt this video will reach many people, but I hope it reaches the people who love FusionFall as much as I do.